Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. This is the Jack Kirby tribute panel, and I'm, well, who would I be, right? This is Jack Kirby panels. That's the only guy who does them these days. Thank you for being here. We do these panels at every convention that invites me, because otherwise I spend the whole convention talking about Jack to people. I talk about Jack all the time to people anyway. And he was so important to this industry and to all of our lives that it seems always appropriate to get together. And it's interesting, we have not exhausted the subject of Jack yet. We never will exhaust the subject. To forestall a question that we'll get if I don't answer it up front, the book that I have out now on Jack is the first of two. The second one is so long that even John Marl will fall asleep reading it. Since well before Jack passed away, but especially since then, I have taken, every time I come across a Jack Kirby fact that I didn't know, I added into, did this just cut out? I just added into did the mic just cut out? No, I'm sorry. The reverb changed on the room. There it is. I just added into the manuscript. I just open up a file and write in another couple paragraphs here and there. And the thing gets longer and longer because I keep finding out new things about Jack. I just got another cache of Jack's personal papers, documents, memos, correspondence, contracts, things like that, which I had not had access to before. And what happens is that it's like a Chinese puzzle. You get a new piece, and suddenly you got to go back and reassemble the other pieces. You go, oh, I get that now, and had this very complicated timeline of Jack's life, trying to figure out when things happened, relation to one another. Dick helped me. Dick Ayers here kept wonderful records of when he worked on everything, and so that gives me a guideline of when Jack worked on them, because Dick was not far behind him when Dick was inking his work. So I was able to calculate what Jack was working on during key events of his life. I figured out what story he was doing each time one of his kids was born, and figured out what story he was probably working on when the Kennedy assassination took place, and things like that. And then you plug those into the matrix, and you suddenly discover, oh, that's why Jack was writing about that. Oh, that's why Jack was interested in that. And it's a fascinating thing. And one of the things that happens is, as I read more of Jack's work over and over again, I keep seeing more of Jack in the stories. I will read a Kirby story that I previously have read dozens of times. Now I'll suddenly go, oh, wait a minute, there's Jack. He was that character, and he was also that character, and that was Roz, and that was Neil, and that was Jack's brother-in-law. Whatever it was, his life gets in, and that's what Jack is writing about. There are levels of subtext in his work, even when he was only plotting stuff that other people were dialoguing, that I look at these things and I go, why didn't I notice that before? And I suspect someone has snuck into my room and reprinted some of my old comics and added in new details and new plot points I didn't realize before, because the material is so rich. Anyway, to answer the question everybody asked me, I don't know when the second book will be out. It will be out when it's finished. I don't know how long that will be, and when you see it, you'll understand why it took so long. It is enormously detailed, and it would not be unfair for me to say I'm also kind of waiting for certain, things to happen in the world that will make it more easier to tell some of the parts of Jack's story. So. We've got about an hour, a little less than an hour here to talk about Jack. I have asked two people to whom we are all very grateful. Not only, obviously we're grateful to these two gentlemen for their fine work without Jack Kirby, because both of them have done distinguished work in comics over the years on their own, and okay, I did that the other day to someone. See, I was at Bob Kane's funeral, and was standing there watching the coffin being lowered. And then they were at Bob Kane's funeral. There were 4 people from the comic book industry. There was Paul Smith, Mike Barr, Stan Lee, and myself. And we're standing on top of this mountain watching Bob Kane's casket, which Bob Kane was buried, so help me, with Batman toys in his coffin. It was an open coffin, and there's Bob all stretched out, and they're putting toy Batmobiles and Batcopters into the coffin with no comic books, but toy Batman toys. I had to check the coffin to make sure Shelley Moldoff wasn't in it with him. But so then we take us up to the mountaintop, and they're lowering the coffin into the ground. And I'm standing next to Stan Lee, and we're bored because it takes a long time to lower the coffin. And Stan turns to me and he says, "You know who did a great job inking Kirby? Steve Ditko. Great job inking Kirby. Great. He's too valuable to use as an inker too often, but he was great." I go, "Oh, thank you. How about we just stand here and watch Bob lowered before we discuss other company artists?" Anyway, but I think about that. You know, we love the work that Dick and Joe did inking Jack. I also like the work these guys did on their own. But would you join me in welcoming Mr. Joe Sinnott? And Mr. Dick Ayers.
Hey, Dick. Speech.
And I'd be surprised if your favorite inker of Jack's work at Marvel was not on this stage at this moment. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let me ask you a little bit about the reaction you get now from people about having inked all of Jack's work over the years. You must have I love the fact that these guys are mobbed at these conventions. That you go up to them and they've got lines of people wanting autographs and prints and cover recreations and books and things like that. I love the fact that I go to Artist Alley and I see these guys have a huge line. I want to go over to say hello to them, and there's a huge line, and I'm annoyed because I can't get through the line to go say hello to my friends, but I'm also so pleased that these guys are rightly so considered superstars and celebrities of this convention, and that the industry has finally woken up to how valuable and treasured these people are. Joe, when people come up to you and they say, "God, I love the way you inked Kirby on..." Finish the sentence. What do people say to you about Jack's work all the time?
Well, hey, just what you just said, and Mark, and we are amazed that they are so sincere. You can tell they're sincere. They're not just saying that, you know. And actually, we feel like rock stars. I mean, I'm amazed. You know, years ago, it seems the older you get, right, Dick, that we're given more acclaim than we ever had, you know. And years ago, of course, we had no acclaim whatsoever. But and we're amazed that all the people. Well, look at the crowds out here today that know our work, and it's actually, our work is known all over the world. Mark, my son Mark, has a website, and he gets so many emails from people all over the world saying how much they love. They always mention the first book they ever saw, and of course they all want a little sketch here and there. But you know, I'm amazed at how sincere they really are, and you can tell that. You know?
What's the thing you did with Jack that most people mention? Is there a specific issue you hear about more, or a cover, or one piece that people mention a lot?
About 51.
I
don't know how many 51 people came up today, or not yesterday, and today, of course, and they have 51. In fact, one fellow yesterday had the original. It was the cover, wasn't it? Splash. It was the splash, or was it the cover? Splash. The splash to 51, Mark. Mm-hmm. And first I've seen it since I mailed it into Stan back in when? How many years ago was that?
67 was that when that had been?
Gee, and it was spotless. Usually you see coffee stains and glue marks all over it. It was in immaculate condition. And of course it was the original. I checked the back, make sure it was the original. And I was amazed. In fact, Mark took a nice picture of it. I had to get a picture of it. And as you know, I don't know what your thoughts are, but most people, that's their favorite story. You know, I think Fantastic Four. You know, a lot of people have told me that.
When you inked that issue 51, did you feel that was a special issue at the time?
I never knew what was going on in the stories because, you know, the pages came all mixed up, and you did the best. Sometimes, like I said, you would ink something and not even be aware of what the expression on the characters' faces were. You know, everything was so vague in a lot of respects. Certainly not with Kirby, but no, I certainly didn't. In fact, even when I did number 5, Fantastic Four, they were just more characters that Stan was putting out. We didn't, as you know, we didn't expect them to go anyplace. Spider-Man, no matter what, you know.
Let's tell the people about the issue of Fantastic Four that you and Dick co-inked. You and Dick co-inked.
I don't remember that.
Yes, you do. It was Fantastic Four number 6.
Wow, hey, yes, you're right. There's a long story on that. You did number 6, Dick, right?
Oh, yeah, that's where it started. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, I had done number 5. Stan called me up and said, Joe, he said, I can't get anybody to ink Kirby's story. Would you ink it for me? I said, yeah, send it up. So anyway, I inked number 5, and I had never heard of the Fantastic Four. I never saw the books. I didn't know they existed. And when I saw them, I said, gee, what great characters. But I never thought they were going to go anyplace. And so when I inked it, and of course Dr. Doom was in that, I thought, what a great character, even though he was much more simplified than he evolved into. But in any case, I did number 5. And Stan called me up and told me how much he liked it. He said, I'm sending you to number 6, Joe. Well, you know, I really didn't want to get channeled into inking, but I enjoyed number 5 so much. I said, fine, Stan. So when it came, I just started to ink it. I think I did 3 or 4 panels, right, Mark? And a script came in from Treasure Chest, 65 pages on Pope John the 23rd. And I had promised Treasure Chest I would do this. This was pencils and inks. So I called up Stan. I said, Stan, I have a commitment. I said, I have to do it. And in fact, I want to do it. So I'm going to have to send number 6 back to you, you know. So, you know, he said, oh, don't worry about it. I got a great guy to take your place, Joe. And he said, you know, Dick Ayers, of course, you know. So you were saddled with the rest of the story, Dick, right?
Yeah, you had done a couple of the girls. I guess it was Sue Storm.
Dick, get closer to the microphone.
Yes. Oh, Dick, a little closer.
Get closer to the microphone.
Yeah, Joe had done a couple of Sue Storm girls.
Right.
And that was a terrific, beautiful girl. And so then I just picked up and I kept it all the way. Did the cover, did the whole thing.
But really, Dick, am I right when I say we didn't expect those books to go very far?
No, I didn't think anything of it.
Just another book.
No. And didn't think the superhero bit was going to catch on again either.
No? No, we had just done the monster books, and they were a lot of fun.
Now you can a little better.
Really? They were a lot of fun, but when the superheroes came out, just another genre. We didn't think they were going anyplace.
And another thing, in the progression, I never followed comic books before World War II. Like I was 9, 10, some odd years. I was 18 when I went in the Army. But I still never, only comic books I looked at were Famous Funnies or were reprints of newspaper strips. So I didn't know Kirby and Simon, or Simon and Kirby. Until I come back, I'm going to art school in the Flatiron Building down in New York. And so on Fridays, I would go looking to try to get work. I mean, I just came out of the Army. I'm anxious to get started. So I happened to go, I think it was Popular Science or Mechanics. I wanted to do cartoon spots. And the guy looked, oh, no, your work, you should work for Simon and Kirby. Oh, who's them?
Yeah.
I didn't know them. Then I started to look to see what they were talking about. And I never went to look, never went to see Simon and Kirby. So time goes by, and I'll flash right through. In my whole career, I worked for Simon, and I worked for Kirby. Different times. And the first time I saw before Fantastic Four were the monsters. And I loved those. Jack could really draw one great big page or one great big monster, and it was always an inspiration. And I wouldn't know what was coming until the special delivery man gave me the package, and I opened it up and I could smell the cigar smoke. And so when we got into Fantastic Four, and you just kept doing whatever Stan sent you. That was the way, because I worked just like Joe. You work at home. And, no, I don't know. I didn't realize it was catching on.
No, of course not. Nobody did.
It's just another book, right?
Yeah.
And so came along X-Men and Avengers, and then came along doing Westerns. But working for Jack, or with Jack, was terrific in that he was just the same kind of tempo. He must have worked just the same hours, because I could depend on it. At 7:30 in the morning, that special delivery man would bring a package.
Yep.
The smell of cigar smoke.
Really?
Dick, did you make more per hour inking or penciling or both? Just, did you make more money per hour? Inking or penciling or both?
I could do better if I did the whole thing, which in the 1950s it became a little bit desperate to do. I was doing Wyatt Earp and whatever Stan had in the space or horror stores.
Well, when you penciled a story you were going to ink, you didn't pencil it the same way if somebody else was going to ink.
No, of course not.
When you penciled a story that you were going to ink,
Yeah.
you didn't pencil it the same way you would pencil
No, I
a bunch
wouldn't.
of somebody
It wouldn't
else.
go as completely finished, but pretty darn tight. The outline was very tight, and so just blacks and patterns.
Did you follow your own pencils closely?
Pretty darn much, yes.
But, Mark, I think, Dick would agree with me that when we did our own pencils and inks, we did most of the work with the inking. In other words, the pencils were just barely outlined, and you did all the detail and everything with the inking, because you knew what you were going to do. You knew what was in your mind, So I used to pencil very lightly. Of course, you had to be careful if you were doing a biography of somebody, the faces and things.
So let's go back to this thing. Now,
So now, like making the money,
okay.
because you got to get very methodical. You got a certain rate, and you want to figure out how much you're making per hour. So here comes a page that I'm going to sell. I say I'm going to ink it, and the rate is $7 per page when it first started. $7 per page. In those days, that's still that would break down per hour. If you were lucky, you could do it in 3 hours. Ink that page. I would get up and I would start work at 6 o'clock and hope to hell I had that one page done by noontime so I could have a 10-minute sandwich and then go back to work and do the next page until I'm done by supper time. And I'd be lucky. So most of the time you'd have to, because I always would letter the night before I did the job. In other words, that night before I went to bed, I lettered the 2 pages I was going to do the next day. And that's the way you do it by the hour.
Okay.
So I was only making, like, say, $3 an hour or $2 an hour.
Okay, now
Lettering was $3 a page. I wanted to make sure that I lettered that page in 1 hour. I like a half an hour.
Yeah, I did a panel one time with Kirby. I forget what book it was, but like Dick said, back when we first started on the Kirby stuff back in the early 60s, there was over 50 characters in the one panel. It was a down shot of one of the buildings in New York, and it was, they were being let out.
Oh, yeah.
And, boy, when you're getting, $10 a page,
Yeah.
It was, you had to figure how much you were making an hour.
Yeah.
You know?
always had that in your mind, yeah.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
In fact, in art school, asking one of the instructors, this is in the class, how do we judge what to ask for our work? He looked right at us, and he said, you figure out how many hours you're working at it, and then how much you want to make per hour.
Sure.
Okay. Now, question for both of you. Mail comes, there's a 20-page Jack Kirby pencil story, all lettered, it's all 20 pages are there. Where do you start? Do you start on page 1? Do you start in the middle?
Well, I always started right at the first page. That's where I get the big panel, that's where I got my feeling. And then I work all the way through so that way I could get the feeling of going from scene to scene to scene.
Now, are you inking panel 1 finished by the time you ink panel 2, or do you jump around on a page?
No, never jumped around the page. I go 1, 2, 3. In fact, I got it so that I would do the top 3 panels, pencil and inked and lettered, and then move to the next 3.
Okay.
I worked in an opposite direction, Mark. I always saved the splash page to last, and the other pages I would work on the bottom first, because I didn't want to smear them by working on the top panels. A lot of times, especially in the summer, no air conditioning. If you worked on the top panels, you got the bottom part with moisture from your hands and the sweat and everything. And so once you got down there, the stuff would bleed a little bit. So I always did the bottom panels first.
Was that less of a problem when they went to the smaller size originals?
No, of course, we were disappointed when we went to the small pages. Kirby was made for those big pages, there's no question. And I really questioned the fact that he would be able to do as well as he did with the large pages. But of course, he did just as well. But those large pages, when you look at them today, even, because his stuff was so dynamic, and every panel was like a splash to Jack, even if it was a headshot, When I looked at the pages yesterday, Mark, remember, I couldn't believe how effective Jack was. Even simple panels. Just, hey, he was one of a kind, that's all there is to it.
Did the switch to the smaller size originals speed you up or slow you down?
No, I didn't see any difference whatsoever. Jack with his big machines and stuff, he might not have put as much into, although that's hard to believe too. But the thing I liked about Jack, in fact, I did awful lot of work with John Buscema, and I try to impress upon John to every story do at least one pin-up, because Kirby was noted for that. And as a reader, I would think they all seem to love those big splashes that Jack did. When I say splash, I mean pin-up pages.
Full page panel.
And Buscema did great pin-ups, but he didn't do enough of them, and he just didn't feel like he should do one-up story. But then again, that goes back to the writer. The writer should have included a splash, a pin-up page in each story. I mean, because visually it looked good in the book, and I always, in fact, I told Sam one time, I said, Stan, I know it would cost money. I said, Stan, when you do these pin-up pages, why don't you have it on slick paper, perforated, where you can pull it out and frame it, Really, it would have been a good idea. It might have been a good incentive for people to buy the book, too. But we never got around to that, of course,
Leaving Jack aside for the minute, who was the artist you most had fun inking? Enjoyed inking? Like, oh boy, I get to ink one of these guys' stories.
Well, Kirby was my favorite. He was so...
Leaving Jack aside.
Oh, that's right, leaving Jack aside. Well, the early Buscema was a treat to work with. But there were a lot of guys. Gene Colan was so nice to work with, and John Romita. And I also wished I could have worked with John Severn. John Severn's one of my top 3 artists. I just love his work, his versatility. But John Buscema's artwork was as everybody knows, his draftsmanship was so good that when you got done with one of his pages, you got a lot of satisfaction, because it was a thing of beauty, really, I did so many Thors with him, and Fantastic Fours, and Silver Surfers, and he did a great surfer, even though Jack, instituted the surfer.
Dick, who do you like inking besides Jack?
Why, Gene Colan, at the period when it was Captain America on a motorcycle. That was fun.
Motorcycles and stagecoaches were the 2 things I hated to draw. Oh, it's terrible drawing wheels.
Yeah, with the horses, I'll tell you a good story. Where I was starting the Ghost Rider, and I'm very proud the first book came out, so I sent it to my cousin in the country, girl cousin. And she always was into horses and riding and all that. And she wrote back, "My God, Dick, your horses belong on a merry-go-round."
Well, we could put a lot of dust around their feet. But I remember when I was in art school, the cartoonist and illustrator school, we used to kid a lot about different artists. And Zach Mosley, even though Smiling Jack was one of my favorites when I was a kid, the guys always brought it up, he said, Zach Mosley can't draw hands and he can't draw feet. So when he draws fat stuff, who was one of the main featured characters in the strip, he would draw him with his hands behind his back all the time and standing in front of a big rock.
If Stan Lee had come to you, and let's say it's 1966, and Stan Lee comes to you, let's play a what if here. Stan says, I don't know what to do with you. What would you like to do? Is there a book? Would you like to pencil? Would you like to ink? Is there a book in the house you'd like to do? If you could have any assignment I can give you, what would you like to do?
I'll tell you the way he put it. because he said, I know you've done always your own lettering, your own penciling, and your own inking. And I can't give that much work out anymore. In fact, I think the business is sinking. It's a ship. It's going down. We got to leave it. You got to do like the rats, get off the sinking ship. So I took him at his word, and I went to work for a post office. 3 days later, after I had enough of emptying trucks and all that bit, well, I called upstairs and said, well, I did what you said. I got with the post office. Well, Dick, let's try you. Let's have you ink somebody. Okay. So I still had Wyatt Earp I was doing every other month. He sent me the cover to a Wyatt Earp that was penciled by Jack Kirby. And so here was the long, lanky guy with the odd gun and the stupid-looking guns. But it came out pretty darn good. It had the action and all that. And the next thing I knew was Stan sent me the Monsters. Monstro was the name of it. Fantastic. It was beautiful. And then I had gotten around to, all right, this is what he wants. I looked and saw what Joe Simon did. And he put weight into his stuff, and then brought it into life. So I did that. And it's better and better, and I'm learning at the same time. It was terrific. And then Jack said, why don't you do Sky Masters for me? Great, that's a beautiful strip. Okay, good. Now he says, I'll give you a couple of weeks of Wally Woods inking. You do likewise. You do it like him. Naturally, I figured they wanted the strip to look the same. Well, that was like asking me to work like Rembrandt. It looked like a pretty impossible task, but it got there and I got to love it because the way Wally Wood add those blacks and everything, it became terrific. So evidently there was a clicking with Jack too.
Yeah. But if Stan had asked you, do you want a pencil, do you want to ink, do you want to do westerns, do you want to do war, what would you have told him in 1966?
1956.
66.
He still felt that way. That's why he kept me on the westerns.
Okay. But what did you want to do?
I love westerns, and so I wasn't questioning anything on that.
Because I like the work when you inked it yourself, and you were some of the westerns. I like those Human Torches you did by yourself. I like that issue to a Giant Man you did by yourself. I always liked. My favorite Dick Ayers work is the work when you did it all by yourself. You got looser, you got energy into it, and power, and the characters. I've got the splash page to a story you did, a Human Torch story, The Plant Man, which Jerry Siegel wrote under a pseudonym.
Oh, that was a beaut.
And it's a beautiful page, and it's fun, and you look like you're having fun with that work.
Yep. And my only regret is because I didn't find out that Jerry Siegel was John Carter.
Joe Carter, it says.
Carter.
Yeah, the credit.
I never knew that until he was interviewed. Somebody was interviewed, and they said that. My God, if they'd only let me know that Jerry had written that story, I would have gone even better. The story was so good that I really got with it.
Yeah, Bo, you may have noticed out in the exhibit hall that the Siegel family is taking over half the DC booth at this moment. Joe, if Stan had called you up in 66 and said, Joe, what do you want to do for us?
Well, just like Dick said, I'd say, Stan, let's go back to the westerns we did in the 50s, you know. Everybody loved doing westerns, you know.
No, we're fine. We have no video. Thank you.
And like I said, the 50s, the rates were fairly good in the 50s, all things considered, until we start going belly up, and then Stan would call you every couple of weeks and say, could you take a cut, Joe? You know, things aren't that great. But
Quick story.
Okay.
Pardon me?
Quick story.
Dick's got a quick story.
When he knocked that page rate down so low one day to $20 a page or something, pencil, ink, and lettered, that's when I let steam out my ears, and I said, all right, I'll do the page the same exact size it's printed, 6 by 8 or 9 or whatever it is, and I did it, rawhide kid, that size, and I sent it in. He called me up, and he said, look, Dick, you buy the paper, I know I can't tell you the size, but if I send your work to the printer and everybody else is 12 by 18 or 10 by 17, why, it'll get lost. Oh, the solution is I take the 12 by 18 and I turn it this way and I do page here and a page there. And I did that all the way through until Kirby came back and he was always 12 by 18. Then I said, oh, I like this too, you know, I went back to it.
Yeah, the 50s, like I said, was a tough time. In 1953, I think it was, I was up to $44 a page, pencil and ink, and that was a good rate. 1953. But I didn't think there'd be any end to it, and then all of a sudden, around 56, Stan would call up, or a secretary, and say, Joe, could you take a cut? So it went from 44 to 42. First thing you know, in 57, we were down to $21 a page, and he expected the same quality of work that he was getting for $44, and it was tough. I had 4 children at the time. We had no unemployment insurance. In fact, when we went belly up in 58, I said, well, I'll go over to the unemployment office. I went over to the unemployment office, very naive, and they said, Joe, you can't collect. You never paid Social Security, And it was tough, so we scrounged around. I did billboards and record covers, anything. You wouldn't refuse anything. Of course, I went out, and the mistake I made was as soon as we went belly up, a guy from Watson Guptill Publications came to me, and he said, Joe, my son-in-law's written a good script, and he said, we'd like you to pencil and ink it. And it was all about a frogman in the Navy. It sounded great, but he said, I got connections at King Features and a couple others. He said, I'm sure I can sell it. So I knocked myself out on that before I even went out to look for other work. And, it looked good visually, and the story, I guess, was pretty decent. But everybody was looking for Bigfoot stuff, funny stuff, and we were turned down every place we went. And it's funny, though, a year later is when they came out with the TV show Sea Hunt with Lloyd Bridges, and it was the same thing that we had proposed, And but that so then when it didn't sell, naturally, my kids came home with comic books from. They went to a parochial school, and from Treasure Chest, and I said, gee, Reed Crandall was working for them, and a couple other guys, and I said, gee, it was a good variety of stuff in the book. And I sent my samples to them, and they called me up right away, and they said, Joe, we like your work. So they sent me a story on Joyce Kilmer. They liked the way I did likenesses. I did Babe Ruth, MacArthur, and Eisenhower, John Kennedy, all those things. I used to get all the biographical stories, and poor Reed Crandall, he got the building of the Brooklyn Bridge and the Panama Canal. but I mean, he could handle that kind of stuff. But he did some great stuff for Treasure Chest magazine. Then I went over to, even though I had quite a bit of work from Treasure Chest, I went over to Dell, and they gave me work right away. I did The Life of the Beatles, and 12 O'Clock High was a pretty popular TV show, and I loved doing airplanes, all about the B-17 bomber, and I did 4 or 5 books, but then the TV show was canceled, so they had to cancel the book. But for Dell, I did the Life of the FBI, and so it was a fun period, but it was a hectic period, the early 60s. It really was,
What questions would you like to ask either these gentlemen or me, for that matter, about Jack or about anything? Steve. This is Steve Rude, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, Steve.
I'm told I can project, so hopefully you can hear me from the mic. But my question is for Joe. I'm dying to come up and shake your hand after this, but I want to know how a guy with your hand can do such perfect lines in 3 pages a day.
I know it. It's funny. The one thing I was always proud of, the fact, for many, many years when I did the Fantastic Four, I never used a front square. And the only thing I used was a compass and a Hunt 102 nib and a number 3 Winsor Newton Series 7 brush. And everything I did was freehand, but it got to the point where I said, gee, I'm doing a lot of work doing that freehand, because if I happen to miss a line or something, I got to white it out. So I did buy myself a French curve, even though I really didn't know how to use one. And so most of the early stuff that I did with Kirby was all freehand, no mechanical means whatsoever. But even today, I'll be 82 in October, and thankfully, I still have a very steady hand. Of course, it could go overnight, but I did some stuff just last week. A friend of mine, he's got a newspaper, and he wanted me to do something to commemorate, Memorial Day. So I did a picture of a soldier kneeling down like in prayer, muddy field with the rifle stuck in the ground with the helmet on it, and it came out fairly good. And I colored it, of course, and it's as good as I could have done in 1962 when I felt I was really at my peak, But I felt that my peak has been pretty steady over the years, I've been grateful for that, And I think it's all because of my steadiness, Of course, I always did put a lot in my work. Even Jack, even though you didn't have to add a thing to it, I seemed like I would add just a little bit here and there, maybe a little black here or whatever. Because to me, the blacks are most important part of an artist's renderings, because, in fact, when I get a page and I get it finished, I squint my eyes and look at it to see if it's balanced. And so I always said the blacks and the weight of the line. I like thick and thin lines. That's the reason I used to love working with the brush. And with Kirby, you could use a brush. You could do probably 80-85% brush with Kirby's work because it was so big and dynamic. And of course, in those days, the brushes were a lot better than they are today. So there was a lot of reasons. But Kirby, like I said, Mark knows, he was just one of a kind, even though he wasn't the greatest draftsman in the world, but nobody could tell a panel like he could, I mean, if you want good drawing, John Buscema, John Romita, Gene Colan, I mean, they're beautiful drawings. But Kirby is just unbelievable. He's in a class, and if you could see his pencils when they came into me, I used to marvel at him, and I saw so many of maybe 75, I probably did 75 stories with him, FF and other stories, if not more. And you were marveled because he never gave you less than his full effort. Like I did number 5. I did a couple of westerns with him before that, but from that point on, right to the end when he did 102, everything was the same. His work never deteriorated. It was just great all the way through, People used to say, gee, Kirby's slipping a little bit, like up in the 80s and 90s. But if you look at some of those stories like Ben Grimm Killer and Ben Grimm Betrayed, Jack with those gangsters and those double, what do they call them, the double-breasted pinstripe suits. And boy, Jack loved to do that kind of stuff, didn't he, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Another question. Yes, sir.
Mark, it's great to see so much of Jack's work back in reprint from the 60s, 70s, 80s, both by Marvel, DC, etc. But are we going to see some of this 40s and 50s stuff coming? Newsboy Legion?
Yes, I'll give you a stock answer. People will ask me, why doesn't DC reprint this? Why doesn't DC reprint this? DC believes, and I think they're probably correct, that you don't want to glut the market. There is a marketplace for a Kirby book every 8 months or so. If they put them out too fast, they'd step on each other's sales and they wouldn't sell. So I believe, this is not an official announcement by the company, I just believe DC is going to reprint every single thing of Jack's that they have to reprint. It's just a question of what order they're going to do it in and how long it's going to take to get to it. I've done the forward for the OMAC book, which I think is coming out shortly. And I've just been told I'm going to start on the forward for the Demon collection. Tentatively, probably, the next thing will be Our Fighting Forces with the Losers. We'll follow that. The one after that will probably be either a Simon Kirby volume of stuff from the 40s, or it will be a collection of all that mystery stuff Jack did in the 50s, House of Mystery, My Greatest Adventure stuff. And whatever it is, they'll get to it all, I think. And the same thing is true as Marvel. We will look 5 years from now and realize that every major work of Jack's has been reprinted in the last 10 years.
Mark, I must say something. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. We can't thank John Morrow enough for the way he's put on all that Kirby stuff that most of us never saw before. And it's amazing the prodigious amount of work that he did, John, Great stuff that was never used. That's the amazing part of it, And I saw so many covers that we did, and actually not that Kirby ever did anything bad, but some of the covers that were rejected were better, or I thought, at least, than the covers that were used, you know. What was the one cover you used? I remember I inked it for you, and the Human Torch was flying, and that was a beautiful cover. And it,
Yeah.
oh, but there were so many others.
I'd like to say something here a little bit. In that, what I found with Jack's pencils in the monster period, I got one, I think it was about a straw man or a scarecrow. When he was used, he took up the whole panel. I figured, by God, I can ink with a number 11 brush on that.
Oh, yeah.
And I did,
Really?
big as my thumb.
Really?
And that was so then I did a couple of Sky Masters with that big brush. Then one day it disappeared, and I found out my son had taken it and painted with oil. So that ended that career. Boy, what you could do, I could take that brush and just, and it saved time, because I could put in a nice big area down the side or whatever.
I'd like to add to that, too. You know, back in our prime, so to speak, the 60s and 70s, when you came across a good brush, you hate it. Oh, really? I mean, you don't realize what an artist goes through, but once it lost its snap, you almost cried. I had brushes that I felt like bronzing and hacking, putting up. And really, when you had a good brush, it lasted so long if you took good care of it. And you can tell, the first thing when people come up to me with a book and they say, Joe, what do you think of this story? I said, gee, that was a good brush I had when they did that. Really? I mean, you can tell when you had a good brush because it improved your work. There's no question about it.
And one time, in that department, taking care of the brush, all those years, it was like 50 or 60 years, I'd washed the brush. In fact, I learned to put soap.
Oh, yeah.
Did all that. My wife came home with a set of new brushes, and they're made in China someplace, and they got white bristles. And they were so great, so I figured, gee, I'm not going to wash these brushes. Because I remember Joe Kubert, when I was teaching out there, I asked him, what did he do with his brushes? He said, nothing, I don't wash the darn things. So I take and I wipe it now, go in that direction to get it to a point. This lasted, 4 or 5 years I've been using this darn brush, and it's great. All I do is just wipe it off. But wipe it off so that it goes to a point when I do that.
An artist goes through a lot as far as expenses go. Back in the 50s, when we had to buy our own paper. I used to buy Bainbridge, which was a good 2-ply Bristol. But even I often tell the fellow at the art store when I go in, I buy Hunt 102 nibs, a Gillette nib. And back in the 50s, I paid 6 cents for them. Now they're $1.29. Can you imagine? And you can buy a half a dozen nibs, and maybe one of them will work. The quality of art supplies are just not the way they used to be. They're
like with the brush. Being young, single all the way through, I always bought just the one brush, Winsor Newton number 6, and I'd use it. And then Doug Cho says, throw it away when it's starting to get 4 points. I get married, and my wife says, why are you only buying one brush? Buy the card, for crying out loud. So you could still do that today. Yeah. I can't do it anymore, but boy.
Gee, I didn't know brushes are so expensive.
I call it the sergeant these days, to come along to give a little push in the right direction. Buy your paper, don't buy it a little bit at a time.
Really?
Store it up, yeah.
Gee.
Another question, sir.
Hi. Honestly, I read your book, Kirby Comics, and I remember an interview that you said you were thinking about coming out with another edition where like more detail, like certain stories, like how things were put together.
Yes.
Are you still going to do that?
Yes, you came in late. We talked about that at the beginning. It's a couple years off still, but that book is still progressing. Thank you. All right, over here.
I have a question for Mr. Sinnott. You were mentioning earlier that you would do little modifications sometimes to Kirby, but pretty much it was all there on the pencil page. But there's one thing that I think I've seen a lot in John's magazine other people talk about, but I don't think I've ever heard you comment on, and that is the evolution of the look of the thing. Ben Grimm from like that lumpy to more of that brick and mortar kind of look for his skin. And people seem to think that you were kind of driving that the way you were refining Kirby's look. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do have to admit to a certain extent. In other words, but that's only normal. In other words, Kirby, I did so much stuff with. Of course, as you know, the early thing would look like a lump of loose cement, you know. But I liked that look. I really did, you know. And I don't like them too hard with the stones, you know. But he did evolve into that, and there were little things that I did add to Jack's work, a little bit here and there, maybe with the ground, dirt, stuff like that. Jack was so good at drawing bricks and stuff. I loved to do that kind of stuff, or lava coming out of a mountainside. So I used to love to see those things when Jack. But I always. No matter how much Jack had there, I always put just a little bit more, maybe a little black here or whatever. And, you know, it's funny, even though Jack was his own man, every now and then I'd see something that looked like my work, you know. He might have said, gee, this looks pretty good that Joe's doing. I'll do it that way. But certainly it wasn't a lot of stuff. But every now and then there'd be a little bit of my influence, let's put it that way. So I'm proud to say that I influenced Jack occasionally. Let's put it that way.
I think both of you two men influenced Jack occasionally. Maybe,
you know what I mean,
subconsciously, but I think he looked at what you guys were doing.
Well, you know that when I first started working with Jack, like I say, it's hard to criticize Jack, but I used to say, gee, Jack can't draw ears very well. I'll give him Alex Roman ears, you know. But then I realized that it wasn't Jack, so I got away from that towards the later on.
But I think also, like, for example, when Dick was inking him, I think Jack looked at the books and saw how bold Dick was doing with these very bold strokes, and that encouraged him to do more bold strokes.
Yeah, but Jack got slicker when I worked with him. Mark.
But he got slicker with you, and he got like looser in terms of the action with Dick, because Dick inked the action stuff so well and caught all that energy in it, and I think that was
but when you think Jack certainly must have done more work than Michelangelo. I mean, really. When you think of the amount of work that he turned out, even with John Morrow's great, Kirby collector and whatever, he did so much work that was never even used, and he'd pencil all the blacks in and everything. Like I often said that when Jack drew a jacket, he had the buttons on the jacket with the 4 little buttonholes where the threads went through. I mean, he didn't leave anything to your imagination, you know. And, of course, there'll never be another Jack.
Okay, let's try a test here. I want you to each give me a one-word answer for this. What does the thing's skin feel like?
Oh, I want to know that.
I feel it feels like a brick.
All right, brick. Now, what do you think?
When I saw it for the first time, what is it? Looked like a rugged blocks or something. Not even like an alligator. So I made him nice and soft. And
the original thing.
When they came out with the Fantastic Four movie, and that wonderful actor played the Thing, he looked like my Thing. Something that somebody would like to call.
Oh, he was great. He was great. Sandman was great too, Mark. By the way,
I asked Frank Giacoya this question one time. He said leather. He said reptile.
Yeah.
He thought it was like a reptile skin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really?
Another question, sir.
How much interaction did you have with Kirby when you inked him?
Yeah, Joe. How much interaction do you have with Kirby when you inked him?
I'll tell you something. I started working with Jack in the early '60s. I did a couple westerns with him. Stan said Jack didn't want to ink it, and so I inked it for him. And in fact, we did a monster book, which is, fortunately, I have all the art to it, and it's called Pildor, Space Pirate, I think it was called. And I think it was in November 1961 we did it. And I don't know whether that came out before the Fantastic Four or not, but Pildor, he was like the prototype for the Thing. He was lumpy, and he looked like the Thing a little bit, you know. But in any case, I worked with Kirby for many, many years. First time I ever met him was 1972 at a convention. Met him for a few minutes. And then I did meet him in '75 at the Marvel convention. We spent 3 days together, and Jack was just so gracious. But I never once spoke to Jack on the telephone about our work. He called me once, many years later, when he was in California, and he asked me if I would ink Fighting American for him for one of the books that were being put out. And, of course, it was a pleasure to ink it. And we never talked once about the Fantastic Four. All those years we worked on it. Never once did he put a note. Stan used to put, notes on the side, borders, to Jack all the time. But Jack never once questioned anything I did. And it was amazing in that respect. And I remember when I did the Fighting American, he wanted to pay me. He said, Joe, he did call me up and said, Joe, what do I owe you? I said, nothing, Jack. I just said, some noontime when you got a break, when you're having your lunch, do a quick sketch of the Thing for my son, Mark. Mark was about 8 years old at the time. So about 2 days later, we get this big, nice package in the mail, and he's got a picture of the Thing, the Cisco Thing, he called him. With the cowboy hat and the guns and everything, Yeah. And what did he say on it, Mark? To Mark?
Here's a comic first.
Here's a comic first, the Cisco Thing. So anyway, I eventually inked it and I colored it, and it's one of Mark's prized possessions. It's something we'd never get rid of, But
I mailed that drawing to you.
Did you really?
I had it there, and I thought to myself, hey, it's a drawing to Mark from... Maybe this could get lost in the mail, and Jack will have to do another one, but I didn't do that.
You wonder why you got it, right?
No, Jack, I acted as go-between between... I started corresponding with Joe in 1969, and we had I have these beautiful letters. The man has the greatest handwriting in the world. Lovely letters. We were going back and forth, and Joe was occasionally asking a question of Jack through me, and I would relay the answer. Right. And I couldn't believe that they had not met. And when we did that Kirby Unleashed portfolio, the drawing that he's talking about, the Fighting American, was for that Kirby Unleashed portfolio, and I called you, and I said, Jack wants to talk to you. I put them on the phone together, and Jack asked Joe to ink this story, and he said, we'll pay you. Because Jack was always very fierce about paying people. He believed artists needed to get paid, and he couldn't believe that Joe didn't want to be paid for this thing. And so he did I think he did that Thing drawing like the next hour. Like he got the phone and just sat down and did it immediately. So
amazing.
And of course the way he did the drawing was time for a drawing. No thought before, just sat down and started doing it. It was an amazing thing. We have like 2 or 3 more questions. Yes.
Following up with what was said before, the period you inked Kirby on Fantastic Four from, his style seems to really mature, become much more. I mean, if you look at the early 20s issues to the 80s, now we have, John, we have Kirby Scholarship, so we can look back. But at the time, did you notice this really bold evolution? I mean, I know you were just kind of working and taking page by page, but did you stop and go, wow, his work is... Did you notice the changes?
Well, I noticed the changes from the different artists, different inkers that worked on him.
When you guys penciled, did you notice how his pencils had changed, become older? And
actually, I really feel that Jack got better as he got older. I mean, except towards the end when his drawings were, Jack wasn't well and everything. But, yeah, you could see it. But I always felt Jack hit his stride, with the Inhumans and Galactus and Silver Surfer, that whole period. But then again, it was such great characters. But right up, I still say right up until the 90s when I was working with Jack. In fact, the last one was 102. But he did some great stuff. Ben Grimm, Killer, I loved, And what was the other one? Not Ben Grimm Betrayed, but something Betrayed. The Thing Betrayed, right? And, I was still amazed right to the end. So Kirby did evolve a little bit, but for the better, of course, His stuff was a little simpler, earlier on. But, hey, the guy's amazing. I can't say enough about him.
We are out of time here, I'm afraid. Dick and Joe will be down in Artist Alley after this. I'm going to be down at the Abrams booth signing more copies of my book. If anybody wants to come by and talk more about Jack. But would you join me in thanking these gentlemen, not just for this hour, but for a lifetime of fine comic art, Joe Sinnott and Dick Ayers.
Really did take a bow.